Welcome back to Telltale Books video. I'm Greg, and I'm going to keep going on my Robert E. Howard series, which I have a pretty good momentum on right now because I got some key books that cover a lot of these early stories of his that I want to go through because I'm just that nuts. This story, we're up to number 6 in my bibliography of Robert E. Howard, which may or may not be accurate. It is called Under the Great Tiger, and it was published in the All Around magazine in May of 1923 and written with a friend named Tevis Clyde Smith. And I have the story in a book I just purchased. This is brand new. You can buy this new. It's one of the Robert E. Howard Foundation books, but it's available through Amazon, and it's a very nicely produced book. Beautiful cover illustration. I love it. It's the early adventures of Alborak, and apparently, under the great title, somehow relates to the Alborak series of stories that Robert E. Howard wrote. So that makes Alborak Howard's first actual series, ahead of Conan and Paul and all the other characters that Howard would write series of stories about. But this one, here's the thing. The All Around magazine was actually a fanzine published by Tevis Clyde Smith. Okay, so this is two friends getting together, writing a story. The other friend publishing the magazine, a little fanzine, distributing a few copies to their friends. And unfortunately, I believe, based on the fact that all I can find, what I thought was going to be a complete story in here, is just a fragment. And more than that, it's only the first page. The rest of the story, I can't find any evidence of it existing at all anymore. So the whole story is lost. All we have is the one page, but quite a page. It really is. And on that page, Alborak is, it's never mentioned. It's, I don't know, I don't know anything about Alborak. I'm still pretty new to Robert E. Howard, and I'm very new to these other series that Howard wrote. Previously, I've only read the Conan stories by Howard. So I don't know how I don't know how anybody figures out that this is supposed to be an Alborak story. It must have been in some letter he wrote or something mentioning Alborak in connection with this. But all we have is the first page, and I read this first page, and you have it is from the viewpoint of the hero, so he isn't named. He's telling the story, and he's in a cafe in Afghanistan, and he starts talking to a chieftain, but this chieftain takes issue with him. Not exactly sure why. But they start fighting. They right away start fighting, and that's really the story. He gets himself out of the fight, out into the street, and that's where the first page ends. The story gets right into the action, grips you right away, makes you interested. Gives you this situation where you're going, what's the chieftain upset about? Why are they fighting? I want to know more. It makes you want to keep reading the story, makes you keep going. It right away grips you, right away throws you into an action sequence. This is really good writing here, as opposed to everything else previous by Robert E. Howard. The first 5 stories that I've read through so far, this one starts showing an understanding of how to write a gripping pulp adventure. Okay, this is not great writing yet. It's not, this isn't the top tale. This isn't the classic story, but it is starting to show some professionalism and some real understanding of how to make this story work and how to get the reader into the story right from the start. And I found it really good. I just wish somebody would discover the rest of the story, because the way Howard set it up, I want to keep going. I want to know the rest of the story. Um, it feels very Indiana Jones-ish. Okay, very Indiana Jones-ish. I really wish the rest of the story was there, and I'm looking forward to reading more of these Alborak stories in the early adventures of Alborak. Another excellent book from the Robert E. Howard Foundation. And so, have you read Under the Great Tiger, or the fragment that exists of Under the Great Tiger, or any other? Well, don't spoil any other Alborak for me. Just, you can say things about it, but don't spoil any of them, because I've never read any of these, and I'm really looking forward to discovering them. But otherwise, leave comments about Alborak, about Robert E. Howard, um, in the comments section. I'm interested to hear what you have to say about this. And come on back for more Robert E. Howard. I'm just getting wound up here. I've already covered his next story because I didn't think I would get these first 6 stories. So I went, or actually, no, I haven't covered the next one. The next one is Hall 2 Goes There. I have covered the one after that, Spear and Fang. I went right to that for my first Robert E. Howard video because I didn't think I was ever going to find the rest of them. But I've been able to pick up these books that cover a lot of this early work. Thing to remember, by the way I'm handling all this Robert E. Howard stuff is the ones that were definitely published. I'm doing those first. Later on, after I've read through all of Howard's famous works, there'll be a lot of stuff that was published afterward that they dug out of his trunks and stuff that for whatever reason he never published. And so I'll be covering those when they finally were published, which in many cases wasn't till the 2000s or the 1990s. So they're stories that were written about the same time as Under the Great Tiger, but I'm not covering them now. I'm going to cover them later when they were actually published. And my reason for that is that my whole idea with these read everything in order publication is because I'm setting myself up like this imaginary reader who would have the ability to start reading the work of an author with the first thing that author published when that author published it. And so they're reading that first story, totally ignorant of everything that comes after. And then they get a hold of the second story and the third story. Okay, you get what I mean here? It's not in the order that the author wrote them. It's in the order that they were published, because this is the, Telltale Books is all about the reader experience. And so I'm doing it from the standpoint of this imaginary reader discovering the author story by story, from the first story they published to the last story that gets published sometime after the author's death. Because that's how, if you're not the author and you're not one of the author's close friends, if you're just a guy reading books, reading magazines, this is how you might have discovered them if you were, you know, reading the books and magazines back in the 1920s, 1930s. And that's the experience I'm trying to recreate here with the way I'm going through everything that I can get my hands on in order of publication rather than in order of when they were written. Never mind the fact that in a lot of cases, I don't have any knowledge of exactly when the story was written. I only know when it was first published. So it makes it a little easier if I stick with just the order of publication, but it also makes it so that I get the experience of the author as if, you know, I'm reading these stories as they come out, as they get published. And so at this point, I have no knowledge of, I do have knowledge of Conan, but I'm taking it like at this point, I have no knowledge of Conan. And at this point, I really don't have any knowledge of Alborak. I don't know who Alborak is. There's a guy with a rifle and a Tyrannosaurus Rex in a forest. Um, I don't know. I don't know anything about Alborak. I'm going to be discovering it for the first time as I go through this, and that's how I want all of these author explorations to be, discovering them in the order that the author's works were published for the first time. So a lot of the stuff that was discovered in trunks after Howard's death and wasn't published until years later, it may have been written in about the same time that I'm at right now, 1923, but I'm not going to read it right now because there's no way any reader outside of Howard's closest friends and family could possibly have read any of those stories in 1923. He had them locked in a trunk. It probably would be interesting to read those stories in the order of the time that they were written because they would illuminate his growth a little more. But I chose not to do that because I want the reader's experience, not the author's experience. That's the distinction I'm making here. So anyway, I hope you'll come back for Halt, Who Goes There? The next Robert E. Howard story. And all the other Robert E. Howard yet to come. Lots of Alborak yet to come. This says only the early adventures of Alborak, so I'm assuming this isn't all of Alborak. So probably a lot more Alborak than just that book. I hope you'll join me for all of that and everything else that I do here on Telltale Books.